I remember a black car pulled up in front of the door, and my house got real quiet. I can remember that silence today as if it just happened.
This is Leona Tate. Back in 1960, she was 6 years old, a first grader in the New Orleans public school system. It was morning at her house. She just had breakfast, and it was about time for her first day at her new elementary school.
Well, I was excited because I knew I was going to a different school, and to get a ride there was even a little bit more special to me.
Leona Tate didn't know it, but she was playing a key role in civil rights history. The people in the car were federal marshals, and Leona was one of 4 girls integrating the New Orleans public school system.
The front is on St. Claude Avenue, and when we got to St. Claude Avenue, all I could see was a mass of people. It was just people all over the place, and the only thing I could relate it to was that a parade was coming, because I knew a parade passed on that street. And the sound of the crowd, I couldn't understand, I didn't remember what they were saying, sounds like a crowd you would hear in the parade. And I could see police on horseback. And I asked my mom, why we got to go to school and we don't get to watch the parade?
Happening outside the car window was not a parade. It was a protest. This is the Louisiana Civil Rights Trail podcast, a series that explores some of the most significant events of the movement in the state and how they changed American history. In the series, we'll hear from historians, experts, and the people who were there. When it comes to civil rights history, what many people don't know is that the events in Louisiana inspired and preceded more well-known stories. Over the course of this series, we'll explore that legacy. But we begin with 3 stories of firsts, 3 pioneering moments of desegregation in Louisiana. We'll start during World War II and culminate with the story of Leona Tate and the integration of the New Orleans public school system. In 1941, war was looming. The U.S. Army commander, General George C. Marshall, knew he needed soldiers. The draft brought him hundreds of thousands of new recruits, but they were untrained.
The first order of business for General Marshall was to begin training these raw recruits.
Retired Captain Richard Moran is a historian at Camp Beauregard in Louisiana.
From squad all the way up to field armies, training began.
Over half the Army ultimately participated in what came to be called the Louisiana Maneuvers.
The most realistic war maneuvers yet held by American troops. In these maneuvers over the Louisiana countryside, as America fought for the time to train its growing army of citizen soldiers, Eisenhower's task was to work out a plan of defense against an invading mechanized force.
At the time, the military was segregated, but the 761st Tank Battalion, formed in Louisiana, would become an example for what a desegregated army could look like.
The unit was constituted on 15 March 1942 and was activated 1 April 1942 at Camp Claiborne.
About 600 soldiers were assigned to the 761st, and they began training how to operate tanks. They participated in the Louisiana Maneuvers. They trained for more than a year, but then, instead of being sent off to combat in Europe or the Pacific, the unit was ordered to stay stateside. They helped train other troops in Texas. And over time, the 761st began to develop a reputation.
Fighting the best of the Army. And so they became the best. And so they became more and more known throughout the Army.
The soldiers of the 761st wore an insignia on their uniforms, a yellow patch. Around the sides, the patch said, "Seek, strike, destroy." And in the center was a panther. And so the men became known as the Black Panthers.
They were one of the best units, and they would have some of the most unique unit leaders.
By the fall of 1944, the U.S. was desperate for combat troops. General George Patton asked for tanks.
So to find that there was an independent armored battalion with over 20 months of stateside training.
The 761st was called into action to fight for Patton's Third Army.
Signal Corps pictures show the devastation wrought by General Patton's armored divisions as they batter their way forward yard by yard.
The Black Panthers joined the Allied push through France, and they quickly proved themselves to be an elite fighting force.
Landing in Normandy, they fought their way across France, Luxembourg, Belgium, and into Germany.
They never failed to impress.
It wasn't just that they were elite. When they arrived in Europe, Patton divided the soldiers and their tanks to support different infantry units. Moran, the Army historian, says that earned the Black Panthers another distinction in the fight against segregation.
They're one of the first black units, and the only ones that would actually fight with white infantry units.
Other units were typically deployed to fight for a week or two, but the 761st remained deployed for 183 days. They liberated concentration camps and fought in the Battle of the Bulge, the largest, deadliest battle of the war, and they took heavy casualties. The battalion helped the case for integration within the U.S. Armed Forces.
This was ultimately the proving ground that would decide to no longer a segregated army, but an integrated army to where, it didn't care as long as you could fight.
But when the 761st came home, the soldiers returned to a still segregated society. Meanwhile, World War II created new jobs and new industries in southern cities. It shook up the segregationist status quo, and it galvanized a new civil rights movement. After the war, in 1948, President Harry Truman signed an end to segregation in the armed forces, which gave the 761st a sterling validation. But it would take almost another decade before the next major blow to the doctrine of separate but equal, and Louisiana would once again play a starring role. Coming up next, a New Orleans attorney, a Creole restaurant, and how they led the first large-scale desegregation of a university in the Deep South. Taking a pause here to say that if you're interested in following the Louisiana Civil Rights Trail from New Orleans to Shreveport to Baton Rouge and many other places in the state, go to louisianacivilrightstrail.com or civilrightstrail.com. It's a great way to learn more about the sites and begin planning your trip here. Okay, back to the story. There was an austere two-story building, fortress-like, on the corner of Orleans Avenue and Roman Street in New Orleans. The building once had been a hospital, and it looked it, spare and efficient. But in the 1950s and 60s, the Knights of Peter Claver, a Catholic lay organization, took possession. And inside, they rented out to the local chapter of the NAACP and the law offices of a man named A.P. Tureau.
A.P. Tureau was someone who rightly is regarded as like the leader of the legal side of civil rights in Louisiana for most of this era.
Michael Martin, a historian at the University of Louisiana, Lafayette, he says that Tureau was an incredibly courageous lawyer.
He ends up with his name on all of these important court cases. And rightly so. I mean, he's doing things that other lawyers won't touch.
A.P. Tureau was born in New Orleans just 3 years after the Supreme Court's Plessy v. Ferguson decision. This was a court order that made separate but equal the law of the land. He would devote his life to upending that law.
I think that he is really motivated by educational segregation or educational inequality.
Nikki Brown is a historian who taught at Louisiana universities for nearly 2 decades and is now writing a history of the state's civil rights movement. Tureau left the state as a young man. He ended up in Washington, D.C., to attend the law school at Howard University. He joined the NAACP,
which was just a small civil rights organization at that time. A.P. Tureau joins the NAACP and works with the chief architect of the strategy, the legal strategy to dismantle segregation.
This strategy was not initially to challenge the doctrine of separate but equal. Instead, the NAACP and Trudeau began demanding that the states live up to the second half of the statement, especially when it came to education.
You know, if they really were about separate but equal, then they had to fund them both equally.
Trudeau knew Louisiana lawmakers could not afford to create parity.
So the idea was to make segregation so expensive that states would eventually have to get rid of it.
Trudeau moved back to New Orleans and began challenging Louisiana's discriminatory laws. His first major breakthrough came in 1940. He worked with another young NAACP attorney named Thurgood Marshall. Trudeau and the future Supreme Court Justice together demanded equal pay for New Orleans school teachers. They won a settlement. Over the years, Trudeau teamed up with Marshall and other famous civil rights lawyers many times. He mentored others, including his future law partner and the first black mayor of New Orleans, Dutch Moran. They huddled in his office talking strategy. And then, at midday, they always followed the same ritual for lunch. Dutch's wife, Sybil Moran, recalls they would walk down the street to a little Creole restaurant called Dookie Chase's. And at the door, the head chef, Leah Chase, would meet them.
And Leah welcomed them, said, "Come on in, come on in."
She'd lead them to a private room.
It was historic. History was made in that room. They continued their discussion. They continued strategizing over Leah's savory gumbo, fried chicken, red beans and rice, and all her other dishes. And she took a risk when she invited that integrated group upstairs, but she said, they're doing right for this country.
In the 1950s, Trudeau turned his attention to segregated colleges. He sued Louisiana State University and won, and he enrolled his son as the school's first black undergraduate student. Historian Michael Martin says this legal victory fit a broader pattern happening across the South. Desegregation started with small victories. But in 1953, that would change. A group of parents in Lafayette, Louisiana, approached AP Trudeau with a new case. Martin sets the scene.
4 students had applied to attend the college, SLI, Southwestern Louisiana Institute, in the fall of 1953. They'd been denied admission.
These 4 students' names were Clara Del Constantine, Martha Jane Conway, Shirley Taylor, and Charles Singleton. There were no universities within 90 miles they could attend. So the parents of these students, after they were denied admission to the only nearby school, approached AP Trudeau. He took the case and sued.
Saying, hey, look, this is obvious. There's going to be something separate and equal. Well, now there's certainly nothing equal, and there's not even anything separate.
In 1954, Trudeau won the case. A federal court ruled that without another nearby option, SLI had to integrate. SLI, which today is known as the University of Louisiana Lafayette, became the first college in the Deep South to admit dozens of black students.
It's usually pegged at around 90 African American students.
The university has one other notable place in civil rights history that's worth mentioning. It's about the men's basketball team, the Ragin' Cajuns. Beryl Shipley was the coach. Like many coaches, he had a burning desire to win. But the Cajuns were struggling to recruit blue-chip prospects. So, Coach Shipley decided to look outside the usual recruiting channels of the time.
Really, without asking anyone, he started recruiting black players. And this was actually against the law because there were segregation laws against integrated sports.
Shipley didn't care. He said he didn't consider himself a civil rights pioneer, but he wanted to win. And here was a way to get better. Shipley kept his integrated team together, despite resistance, and in just a few years, they soared to the top of the NCAA standings. That same thirst for winning, regardless of rules, ultimately got Shipley in trouble. He resigned amidst recruiting violations in the 70s, extending far beyond his integration of the team. But before that, he helped blaze a trail for Southern University athletics. Next up, the story of 4 girls who desegregated the state's largest public school system. Leona Tate was 6 years old. She remembers she was unhappy at the school where she'd attended kindergarten. And 6 decades later, she can still picture the conditions.
It was very crowded. It was very crowded. And the school system at that time was on. Some schools go in the morning and some students go in the afternoon. And it was called the platoon session because it was just so many students at one school. But I was very uncomfortable. I remember crying every day, and it really wasn't in my neighborhood. I walked almost a mile to get there.
Leona started the first grade at the same school, still uncomfortable and unhappy. But then, something started to change. She found herself with extra homework.
Not playing outside with my friends as much, doing things with my teacher that I normally didn't do, even on the weekend. She would be taking me places. So I knew something was happening, but I just didn't understand and know what.
Here's what was happening. Leona was a part of the endgame in a near-decade-long court battle over the fate of segregation in New Orleans public schools. Almost a decade before Leona found herself with more homework, A.P. Tureau and Thurgood Marshall, those legendary Louisiana lawyers, sued the New Orleans public school system over the poor conditions in schools. The case landed before a federal judge, J. Skelly Wright. He was a New Orleans native, and as he looked at the case, historian Nikki Brown says he was outraged.
He took issue with this idea that the Constitution was being willfully disregarded. The 14th Amendment is supposed to guarantee equal protection to everybody.
While this case was under consideration, the U.S. Supreme Court issued its own monumental decision. The High Court ruled in Brown versus the Board of Education that the doctrine of separate but equal was inherently unequal and therefore unconstitutional. These conditions, the Brown decision, Tureau's court case, and a local judge fed up with the injustice of segregation, led to a rain-soaked day in New Orleans in 1956. Judge Skelly Wright handed down an order for the city's public schools to desegregate, citing the Brown case. It was the first such order in all of the Deep South. The order faced deep resistance, but in 1960, they finally agreed to a desegregation plan. Kind of.
The state of Louisiana decided to integrate one at a time, one grade at a time. So it was going to integrate first grade in 1960, second grade in 1961, et cetera, et cetera.
But Black children could not just attend the formerly all-white school of their parents' choice or in their neighborhood. First, they would need to apply and take a test designed to keep them out.
They know that most Black parents weren't going to apply anyway, but there were some parents who were very unhappy with their neighborhood schools and really just wanted their kids to have a better education.
Leona Tate says her mother was one of these parents.
I tell anybody today, if I had the courage my mother had, I'd be dangerous. She'd fight a bull. But she said she had paid her taxes just like anyone else, and she felt like if that's why I had to go to get a better education, that's where she wanted me to go.
And this is why Leona suddenly had new homework and fewer weekends to play. She was studying to beat the admissions test, and she did. Leona was one of 137 Black children who submitted applications to transfer to a white school that year. The school board only accepted 4, which brings us back to what you heard at the very beginning of this episode. A black car pulled up to Leona's house on the morning of November 14, 1960. Federal marshals escorted Leona to her new school. There were two other children joining her, Gail Etienne and Tessie Prevost. Meanwhile, the last little girl, Ruby Bridges, attended another school by herself, William France Elementary. The cars pulled up to their respective schools. Crowds of protesters surrounded them.
They got places for you.
They got out, and the federal marshals protected and escorted them.
Driven by United States Marshals. 4 little girls came. No violence, but plenty of vocal abuse from segregationist spectators outside.
There's a famous photograph of this day. Maybe you've seen it. Ruby Bridges, age 6, walks down the steps of her school, wearing a dress, holding a briefcase. She's tiny. Federal marshals wearing badges and fedoras surround her. Leona Tate remembers walking through the crowd.
We did enter the building without any repercussions, but we were asked to take a seat on a bench outside of the principal's office.
Leona, Tessie, and Gail waited there in front of the principal's office of the school called McDonough 19 for hours. Eventually, they were taken to their new classrooms.
I can remember when I walked in the class and it was a full class of students, and I spoke to a little girl, and she did not respond. It was like I was invisible.
Parents began to pull their children out of that school.
So I left Gail, Chess, and myself in that building, and that lasted for a year and a half. There were no other students.
The community's opposition was fierce. Judge Wright, who'd ordered desegregation, faced repeated threats. Leona and the other girls faced threats too. Federal marshals remained all year to protect them. They papered over the windows of the classroom.
No one could see inside, and we couldn't see outside. We were never allowed to play in the yard. Our play area was right outside of the classroom was a stairwell. It was under the stairwell. And we would sit under there and either eat our lunch there, play our board games.
Leona, Tessie, Gail, and Ruby weathered these conditions. They stayed at their schools. They and their parents persevered. All 4 children finished first grade that year. And the next year, as they moved to second grade, 8 other children entered first grade behind them at previously segregated schools. It was a small number, but they had cracked the door open. Leona helped desegregate several schools over the ensuing years. She graduated from high school, attended business college, and got married. Today, she has 3 children, 12 grandchildren, and 7 great-grandchildren.
So I'm blessed and rich with children, but my children didn't know what I had done for a long time because I didn't talk about it. I didn't want to be interviewed. I just didn't want to talk about it. It was just overwhelming.
But then in 2004, that first grade school Leona helped integrate, McDonough 19, closed. A year later, it was damaged and blighted by Hurricane Katrina. Leona saw it sitting vacant. She began to talk about her experience. She raised funds to fix the building, and it is now being renovated to reopen as a civil rights museum. If you visit McDonough 19, outside you'll see an interpretive marker, the silhouette of a woman, telling the story of its important place in history as a part of the Louisiana Civil Rights Trail. And when you visit other famous sites you've heard about in this episode, you'll find similar interpretive markers at Camp Beauregard, celebrating the Black servicemen who fought in World War II, at the University of Louisiana, Lafayette, for the college students who sued for admittance, and at Dookie Chase's restaurant, which fed and welcomed the Louisiana Civil Rights Movement. Historian Nikki Brown says these events helped Louisiana's civil rights movement begin to gain a reputation throughout the country.
What's going on in Louisiana finally sort of hold the national stage alongside what was going on in Mississippi and what was going on in Alabama.
But there was another aspect to Louisiana's civil rights movement at this time. While the legal battles to desegregate schools wound their way through court in the biggest cities, civil rights leaders were taking direct action. They were organizing boycotts and sit-ins that would inspire some of the most famous movements across the South.
There needed to be a mass movement where African American people came together to try and combat what was happening. So he had this mass meeting at his church.
The bus boycott in Baton Rouge is considered the start of the modern civil rights movement.
That's in the next episode on the Louisiana Civil Rights Trail podcast. After listening to the podcast, follow the actual Louisiana Civil Rights Trail throughout the state. Go to louisianacivilrightstrail.com or civilrightstrail.com to learn more about the sites and begin planning your trip. In this episode, we heard from Leona Tate and Sybil Morial. We also heard from the Camp Beauregard historian, Richard Moran, as well as Michael Martin from the University of Louisiana, Lafayette, and Nikki Brown, a historian who was formerly at Grambling University and University of New Orleans. I'm Marlene Gordon. The Louisiana Civil Rights Trail podcast is sponsored by the Louisiana Office of Tourism and the U.S. Civil Rights Trail Marketing Alliance. Thank you for listening.